The Austrians have decided that talking to Vladimir Putin is a good idea. What is Poland's position on this? What do you think the advantage that could be gained here is in talking to the Russian leadership?
It is not my role as Polish ambassador to the US to comment on the Austrian Chancellor's decisions to travel or not to Moscow and to talk to Mr. Putin. I can only quote many Polish politicians, political leaders who have expressed their misgivings on multiple occasions about negotiating with Mr. Putin. I can't see any diplomatic solution to this conflict, to this war on the horizon. I think we should expect a military solution, namely crushing the Russian army in Ukraine. But of course, I do keep my fingers crossed for the Austrian Chancellor to gain any advantage from these kind of conversations and contacts with the Russian president.
Ambassador, you mentioned military support instead. I'm curious about the defense part of this equation. Poland last week signing a deal for the purchase of 250 Abrams tanks for the United States. You've also said, or Poland has also said, plans to increase its defense spending to 3% of its GDP next year. What does the defense contracting look when it comes to the United States? Can you give us a little bit more color on that?
Yes, we have stressed very clearly over the last few weeks that we need to reinforce NATO's defense capabilities, mostly on the eastern flank. And Poland has become a pivotal country in this respect. And I think that everybody has already understood that we not only had specific foresight in Russia's neo-imperial ambitions over the last few decades, but we also are an important element of this equation, as you rightly noted. We should strengthen our military capabilities. But first of all, let me tell you pretty frankly, we have a very short window of opportunity for weapons deliveries to Ukraine. And I think that what I said before is absolutely of utmost importance. We have to help the Ukrainians not only defend themselves, but also defeat the Russian army in this ongoing confrontation. Now we can see that the Russian army is regrouping. They are moving units to the eastern part of Ukraine. So I believe this will be a protracted war, and we have to be determined and willing to send even more weaponry to Ukraine.
Ambassador, is this becoming increasingly a proxy war, though? You are going to be seeing Ukrainian forces armed with NATO equipment. It would be in some ways easy for the Russians to assume that they are fighting NATO. How do we make sure that that line is maintained between Ukrainian forces and NATO forces?
Yeah. The Russian political elites have been trying to persuade the public opinion that this is exactly the clash between Russia and the free world, and the West, or NATO, if you will. But first and foremost, we should start using the appropriate terminology. Russia is no longer an important gas supplier, a business partner, a nuclear power to reckon with. Russia is now, in plain sight, a terrorist state, ruled by a war criminal, a racist autocrat with genocidal tendencies, and a war criminal who is responsible for all those indescribable atrocities committed over the last 4 weeks on Ukrainian soil by Russian troops. The massacre in Bucha was not an isolated incident. The shelling of the Kramatorsk railway station was doubtless premeditated. Rape and pillage are part and parcel of the Russian army's modus operandi. We saw it in Poland during the World War II. We saw it in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in Syria. Their disregard for human dignity is absolutely outrageous. So when we talk about this particular clash, this particular confrontation, which is not yet a confrontation, a physical confrontation between NATO and Russia, because nobody needs this kind of conflict. This is something that we should also take into account.
Ambassador, you talked about the NATO role in this equation. I'm curious about something that Poland has long been in favor of, setting up permanent NATO military bases on Polish soil. I'm curious, how confident are you that Poland will actually hit that goal as soon as, say, the next NATO summit later in June?
This has been our strategic goal for decades, actually, since we joined NATO in 1999. We have always been stressing the necessity to locate more permanent bases and more US and NATO troops on the eastern flank, not only in Poland, in order to deter Russia's growing aggressiveness. I have seen a kind of a shift in this strategic thinking on the part of some political leaders in the West. We heard NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, saying exactly the same thing about the need to locate those permanent bases, maybe not permanent troops because they will be stationed in Poland and in other countries still on a rotational basis, but permanent bases. This is something we really need right now.
Ambassador, you made some very strong claims just a moment ago about what Russia is doing and its leadership. Given what you've just said, would it be appropriate for NATO's response to be even bolder? Should we be fighting in Ukraine? If what you say is happening, and certainly there are images that would seem to suggest that it is true, but we will ultimately let the courts decide what is happening here. In the meantime, if this is carrying on, why is the West not putting boots on the ground? Why are we not stepping in and delivering an even stronger response to this aggression that we are seeing in Ukraine?
Because it could be a step which could be perceived as too escalatory on the part of the Russian Federation. As I said just a few minutes ago, we don't need a physical, kinetic confrontation with Russia right now, and we are doing the right thing. Delivering weaponry to Ukraine, cutting-edge technologies, long-range air defenses. We have heard many political leaders in the West determined to arm Ukraine in order to allow them to crush and defeat the Russian army. Because I would like to repeat again that the Ukrainians are now fighting not only for their independence, for their freedom, for their sovereignty, they are defending our values, which are so dear to our hearts. And I believe that, again, we are doing the right thing, not engaging Russia in a direct military confrontation, but trying to stave off that unjustified, unprovoked, and brutal aggression.